Hi guys. This will contain spoilers for the show Baby Reindeer, so if you don't want to see spoilers or you haven't seen the show yet, then don't watch this. And I highly recommend that you go and watch the show. It's really good. Really, really good. I would only recommend not watching it if you're like particularly kind of squeamish or averse to seeing quite heavy stuff, quite serious stuff, quite graphic stuff. It's not something I would recommend to like my parents, for example. You know, they're in their 70s and quite easily upset by things they see on screen. But apart from that, I would say like everyone should see it, really. It's an amazing show. Also, some of the stuff I think, if anyone outside of my usual audience sees this, they might not like some of the things I say in this video, but it's just to be expected. And if that weren't the case, then there wouldn't be much point in me saying it anyway, because I'd just be saying stuff that everyone agrees with, I guess. But yeah, so I want to kind of get into that. But just first, just a quick overview of what I thought of the show. And again, this is where the spoilers will come in. Amazing, just amazing, truly amazing. I'm very impatient with movies, with TV. I don't watch much anymore because I think most of it is quite bad. Even stuff that's like, good in quotes, I think is pretty boring, really. I like a lot of the sort of golden era stuff, like The Sopranos, The Wire, Breaking Bad, stuff like that. But I think a lot of stuff that's followed has been sort of cheap imitations of that, or stuff that's proclaimed to be kind of deep and isn't really. And I often just feel I'm just watching someone's uninteresting kind of half-baked opinions on screen, and I don't really care. I just think this is just bullshit. It's all just fake. Nothing is happening in this movie or show that isn't just completely artificially constructed, and it means nothing, and I'm just sat here. I feel sometimes like those things they put above a baby's cot. They put one of those things, like I guess it's called like a mobile or something, and it just like spins round and it keeps them amused. And I feel most TV is that, like especially in the Netflix era, it's just something to put on to numb your brain, and it's boring for the most part. And I know there are shows that claim to subvert that norm, but I don't think most of them do. I don't think many of them do. This show, in my opinion, very much did. It was quite intensely profound, and I was not expecting to see something like this. So we saw the preview of it on Netflix, and I don't really watch much TV. My girlfriend said, "Oh, I want to see that, add it to the list." And I watched the preview, and I thought, "Oh, it looks pretty interesting. Like, I'm kind of intrigued by this." And then we don't watch anything serious really these days because we don't like much of it. So we just watch crap while we have dinner, and again, it's just like to sort of numb our brains. We just watch all this crap, and then on a whim, fortunately, we were just like, fuck it, should we just watch this? Let's just watch it. Fuck it. We've watched the preview. It looks good. It's kind of comedic, so maybe we don't have to pay too much attention, but it also looks quite interesting, and it has some interesting dramatic elements. So let's just watch it. So we started it and couldn't stop watching. I think we watched it in 2 days, which is unusual for us, but we just couldn't stop watching. And for the first 3 episodes, we were really enjoying it. And we were thinking, it's very well made, very well directed, very well shot, very well acted, very intriguing in many respects. But the one thing that was putting both of us off and making it hard to watch, making us question whether or not we wanted to finish it, was the actions of the main character. And if you've seen the show, you'll know what I'm getting at with this, and you'll also know where this is going. So the main character does a lot of things that are, when you watch it at first, quite annoying and morally questionable. And if it were entirely fictitious, you would think this is bollocks. No one would behave like that. This is ridiculous. I can't believe this character. But the fact that it's alleged to be based on a true story makes you think, why is this guy doing this? Like, what's wrong with him? You keep asking yourself, what's wrong with this guy? And I started thinking, it feeds into all my preconceived notions, you know, and I'm like, oh, this relates to modern issues of modern masculinity, or issues of people's neediness and seeking validation, or people not caring about one another, not caring appropriately about their families or adhering to their responsibilities, and all these ideas I have about what's wrong with the world. And it's feeding into all of this, and I'm looking at this guy, the main character, and judging him, looking at him under this microscope, and thinking, I know what type of person this is, kind of. I mean, not really, because it's quite an unusual scenario, but I get what's happening here, and it's kind of annoying me. And it's making it hard to root for the main character, and I'm finding him irritating. And not realizing yet that that's kind of the point, and that, you know, in most shows, even anti-heroes, they're not really anti-heroes, you know? Like Mad Max is an anti-hero, but there's not, at any point you're not going, what the fuck is wrong with Mad Max, you know? Like, stop it, Mad Max. You're not thinking that, because ultimately it's a relatively generic premise and a generic show and a generic character. I love Mad Max Fury Road. It's an amazing film, but it's just a movie, really. And it's an extremely well-made, entertaining one, with like the best action I've ever seen. But it is just a movie, and it's not meant to really, really challenge your perceptions. So you're watching most shows not expecting to see a three-dimensional person. You're expecting to see a two-dimensional person that represents many aspects of three-dimensional people, but isn't really one. But anyway, in this, unbeknownst to us, we're kind of witnessing a real person in action, and I've seen a lot of feedback on the show is like, I can't watch this, the guy's just such a prick, or the guy's so annoying, the guy drives me crazy. And so that was the nagging doubt we had whilst watching it. And then we got to episode 4, and the way things were ordered chronologically, whilst perhaps the most obvious way of doing it, maybe, at least I think to have started with the plot in episode 4 wouldn't have made a great deal of sense necessarily, but at the same time, the way it was arranged chronologically was genius, and putting episode 4 where it was perfect. And we got to episode 4, and immediately we were just gripped by it, or not maybe immediately, but as soon as it kind of got going, and we kind of knew where it was going. You kind of it's hinted at earlier in the show, and you assume, I guess when I assumed earlier in the show, the references to things like this, I assumed these were references to things that happened to him when he was a child. And so but once you see this episode get going, and you see the bloke who's obviously creepy, that not the main character, the one who does the thing that happens in this episode, you know where it's going, and there's a feeling of dread beginning to emerge. And it was so well done. I don't know how it was well done. I can watch other shows and analyze them and explain why this gives you this feeling, and how it was paced in such a way, and how it did this. There was a level of detail and of just the pacing, and so many aspects of this made it extremely uncomfortable to watch in a way that I've not experienced before watching a TV show. So building up to this event, it's becoming very, very uncomfortable. It's becoming upsetting. You feel sorry for the guy. You're also uncomfortable with his choices, the main character's choices. You're very uncomfortable with the, essentially the villain of the episode. And you're fearful, and you're kind of disgusted. And for us, there was an added element, because there's a lot of drugs in it, and I have what I would refer to colloquially with my girlfriend as drug trauma, and it's not to lump it in with severe trauma, but there's a kind of for a long time, if I smelled MDMA, like I would thinking about it even would make me feel really intensely sick and uncomfortable, and remembering how badly we abused it would we didn't talk about it for years. After we stopped taking it, we didn't talk about it for years, because it was so uncomfortable. I think there was the memory of it and the memory of what a bad time in our lives it was when we were abusing drugs, but also the physical muscle memory of it. Our bodies literally, I mean, my body used to like reject it, you know, and I would smell it and I would start to gag when I would smell MDMA. And I know it's normal, it smells gross, but like the more I took it and abused it, the more I'd have this physical bodily reaction to it. And we also got pretty out of hand with a lot of stuff with GHB and acid. We never did crack and heroin or any of the other things that are depicted in the episode, but GHB as well and phenibut and those kinds of drugs we did way too much of. And acid, as I talked about in another video, I had a really, really bad acid trip once. We had many bad acid trips. We had some seriously bad acid trips that were beyond just bad sensory experiences and actually ventured into bad situations and bad outcomes. And one trip I had very long lasting effects. Like it lasted years. The subsequent sort of, I don't know, I wouldn't call it psychological damage I suffered. It was more like philosophical or something, but it was horrible. And I guess trauma is a loaded term, so I'm reticent to kind of say, to use that word literally. That's what we sort of jokingly kind of call it to ourselves anyway, though, because we have a lot of bad feelings tied up in drug memories. There's certain music we just cannot listen to anymore. There's certain substances that going near them or thinking about them or talking about them can be very uncomfortable. And just remembering how many times we could have died and how many times we were in a very bad place in life and just pouring shit down ourselves and knowing that whilst you can have really amazing experiences and really like beautiful experiences with these substances, you can have some really bad ones as well. And the fact that it can swing so far both ways speaks to how vulnerable you are when you're on them. So watching this, we were acutely aware of the very vulnerable state this guy is in, knowing that, you know, we got into these things kind of ourselves or gradually or with one another. I was kind of into it first because I'm a bit older than her. But I wouldn't say a safe environment because I said we were doing too much, but in quotes, safe environment. You know, we were around one another. We love one another. You know, we weren't with some weird bloke who wanted to do bad things to us. We were around one another, and whilst all of our behaviour might not have always been appropriate, and we weren't doing it to try and mess with one another's minds, as you see in this episode. So yeah, we have a strong awareness of this, the insane kind of dichotomy of like good and bad effects that these drugs can have, and how environment dependent those are, and how easily influenced somebody's thoughts or emotions can be when they're on them. So you're watching this guy who's prior to that point just smoked weed, and then he's in a very short space of time he's been given all of these drugs and stuff, and already I'm thinking, oh, this is just, it's like kind of unbearable to watch. It's to be honest, to me also the nature of the use is quite unpleasant to watch, because I feel like, you know, for example, sniffing coke and then taking GHB and MDMA at the same time, it doesn't even seem synergistic to me, and it seems extremely unhealthy. And like that would give you the worst fucking come down ever. And why? It just seems idiotic, and it seems a really reckless thing to do in yourself, but particularly to like give to someone who's younger than you, and who's not experienced with those things. It just seems horrible. So already I'm like, oh God, like he's sniffing coke and then he's dropping MDMA and GHB at the same time, and the guy's just got it in glasses, and he doesn't know how much is in there. There's no thought or planning goes into it apart from the thought and planning that this guy has done. It's horrible. It's horrible to watch. And then, of course, all the abuse starts happening, and you're getting hints that these things have been, and it's not quite clear what's been going on. And he starts to have this bad acid trip. And basically, long story short, from there it gets really bad. It gets really bad. And that scene is... Imagining having a bad acid trip in itself can be so upsetting. And seeing what happens and seeing that when he wants to escape, and really the best thing he could have done was just to have escaped, even if he ran out into the street in a crazy frame of mind, that would have of course been a lot better to him than what happened. That would have even been better than taking GHB to calm himself down. Even just going out into the street like a crazy person and running around and screaming and maybe getting in trouble is better, you know, like in that situation when he's clearly got enough clarity of mind to realise like this is a bad situation, but the guy lures him back in and gives him GHB, and again you're thinking, watching him put it up to his mouth and not wanting to, and basically having to have it like he can't even sip. There's just a level of vulnerability that's uncomfortable to watch anybody in, but it's strange to see a grown man in such a vulnerable state, that he can't even control, and it's a level of vulnerability you can't even experience sober, really. So it's very, very, very upsetting to watch. And then he's, like seriously abused whilst in that state. And it was the most uncomfortable thing I've ever seen on screen. We both were shocked, just not even shocked, I don't know, just horrified, really, like so stressed watching it. And again, that's testament to how well made it was, that it was so deeply stressful to watch it. And a lot of people have had this reaction to episode 4, that they just couldn't believe how uncomfortable it was to watch. It was so stressful, and I found myself crying, like, and not because it wasn't like I'm sad, it was like I'm crying like I'm overwhelmed, like I was overwhelmed watching it. I was involuntarily looking away, and like felt a sense of empathy that's like abnormal when you're watching something. I've watched a lot of dramatic stuff on TV. I've never felt like, oh my God, no, like please no, and I guess part of that is because it's a true story, or it's based on a true story. So anyway, it was extremely intense, and after that you immediately develop a greater understanding of why the character behaves the way he does in the first 3 episodes. And it's very well done, because they possibly pushed some viewers away with those first couple of episodes. Some people go, I'm not watching this fucking guy, this is stupid. But if you wait and you get to episode 4, you go, right, like, I fully understand why this has happened and why he's doing the things that he's doing. And not only that, but I understand now, like, that in my life I've probably often judged people for things that they've done. I've judged people for their behaviour and not known the underlying reasons, or some of the underlying reasons for it. And it was a humbling experience in a way, because as I said, when I first watched the show, I filtered it through a lot of my preconceived notions about what people should do and what might cause someone to not do those things, and what is wrong with people, and how people should be different, and all of this. And it was like, oh yeah, I don't fucking know, really. Like, you don't know why people are doing the things that they're doing a lot of the time, and there might be quite serious reasons. And above all else, I feel that is kind of the crux of the show. And it's a very, very, there's a lot of other stuff in there. It's a very layered show, but I feel that is above all else the predominant message of the show, or the resounding aspect of it is that trauma and the subsequent pain and suffering that it causes can cause people to do things that might seem strange or unusual or bad or wrong or difficult to understand, and it's not even always easy to understand why it causes them to do those things. And that in itself is a great takeaway to have, and it's something that's very important to put on screen. As I said, there's a lot of other stuff presented in the show. There's a lot of other useful ideas or messages people can take from the show. There's also just a lot of it's just interesting and entertaining. But with that central idea regarding trauma, there are some issues, I think, in terms of how people digest that, and it's something that I've talked about in other videos regarding mental health, diagnoses, and the formalization of all of these kind of ideas. And so I want to get into, I guess, what I think is a bit of a problem in how people interpret this stuff. I'm just going to pause this and restart the video because it lags otherwise. So there's a lot of content about trauma recently. It's become a big topic. I watched some of Dr. Gabor Mate's stuff. I'm reading one of his books at the moment. I like him. He seems like a good person. I think he has a lot of good things to say. I do think, though, he's become a bit, or he just is a bit too obsessed with trauma as a catch-all to describe every single thing that a person does that could possibly, conceivably be explained by trauma. And I think it's wrong on a number of levels. Like, first of all, it kind of robs people of their individuality and all the other aspects of their personhood and the things that make them do the things they do, their motivations, their drives, their history, everything they've been through, and it just brings all of that down to one word. Just one word, you know? Secondly, I think it takes something from us collectively, like basically just the moral fabric of our society, like our responsibility, our accountability. I would never want to lose those things myself, and I understand there's has to be an element of taste, you know. If a kid has witnessed or experienced like horrific things, and you know they get caught and they're shoplifting or something, of course it would be horrible to treat that kid as if he was just any other kid going out and stealing, and to not have any understanding for the fact, you know, maybe this kid's just lost both his parents or he's been a victim of some horrible crime or something. You'd be kind of like barbaric to just punish him in the same way as though, and not give any understanding, and not but at the same time you have to be like, you know, stealing is wrong and you can't steal. It's not good for you to steal, and it's bad for the person who owns the shop, unless it's like a big conglomerate, and then who cares really, but you can't tell kids that. It's bad for the person who owns the shop, and it's bad for you, you know, and this isn't something that you should be doing, and it's wrong. You shouldn't steal, but, you know, we're not angry with you. We understand you're having a hard time, and, you know, if you need to talk or whatever, you know, there's a level of understanding you can show whilst also not just exonerating people from of whatever it is that they have done. And I'm not trying to claim that that's the intention of Dr. Gabor Mate's work or anything else. And I don't think it's the intention of this show to show that. I don't think it is at all. I think that's a misinterpretation that people make of it. It might be a bit of a grey area in the show. But just because something can be explained by something, that doesn't necessarily mean it can be 100% justified by it, or even 100% explained by it. People process things very differently, and I've been looking at a lot of the comments online about the show, a lot of the discussions online, and there's to me a kind of bothersome trend of a sort of mob mentality of people who identify with the concept of trauma and appear to be at least momentarily making that kind of their identity and creating a kind of us and them idea and a kind of very binary idea of what trauma is and what it does, what effect it has on people. And there's a kind of animosity towards anyone that questions their oddly rigid, but also at times very flexible understanding of what trauma is and how it affects people, and what expectations we can have of people who are traumatized. The reason I say it's oddly rigid is because there is no room. It's completely rigid in terms of looking, for example, at the main character in the show's behaviour, why he did the things he did, why he engaged with this stalker for so long, trauma, done, that's it, rigid. You can't say, well, maybe also he was also maybe quite selfish as a person and didn't care about his family in this situation and put them through something that was probably quite traumatic in many ways as well, and maybe didn't in life appreciate those familial ties enough, or maybe didn't have an adequate sense of responsibility or protectiveness of others around him. I know many times in my life I've not had enough of a sense of protectiveness for people around me, and I'm glad that I've felt shamed, I guess, into having it. You know, there's times I haven't looked out for people around me enough, and I've had to deal with that and think about it, and I wouldn't really want to have been exonerated for that. I'm not saying I needed to fucking punch myself in the face over it and really beat myself up over it and be hauled over the coals for it, but at the same time, it's good that I thought, man, what's wrong with me? Like, why didn't I protect her from this thing? Or why didn't I do this? What the fuck's wrong with me? Like, because I feel much stronger now, and I feel like a much better person as a result of that. I worry that going too far the other way in terms of understanding my actions could veer into just revoking me of any future accountability, really. And there is a practical benefit to understanding your own behaviour, but it has to be tempered with the practical benefit to also holding yourself up more or less to the same standards as other people. Otherwise, we get into dangerous territory, and there's a lot of examples I want to provide of that. So it's rigid in that sense, and yet it's very flexible in another sense, because this broadly sort of categorized mindset, which I'm kind of generalizing here just for the sake of ease of explaining this, but I understand that not everybody, people don't fit neatly into this group, but there is a kind of, vaguely speaking, a group of people who will just basically say trauma, full stop, to explain the main character's actions. And then when you get to the character Darian, who sexually abuses the main character, there's a kind of we don't think this way at all. We don't think, and by the way, I don't think we should at all. I don't want us to as a society, but we don't think maybe he was traumatized, maybe he was abused, and that's why he's doing this to other people, because we understand that that's not sufficient. You can't do whatever you want and then say, yeah, but I was abused, so... And people try to do that. Serial killers do it, rapists do it, lots of people like this, they do that. And they say, oh, you should have seen what my childhood was like, my dad did this to me, blah, blah, blah. Never mind the fact that they had siblings who didn't grow up to, you know, do these things to people. And it's not adequate. It's not an adequate response when you've done something that bad as what the character Darian in this show does, and we don't entertain it. And it is useful even then to understand, like in terms of understanding why people commit sex crimes in the first place, understanding why people are like repeat offenders and trying to deal with this problem, we have to understand where it comes from. And I'm sure, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the literature on the subject says this, that a huge amount of that stuff does come from people who themselves have been abused. I think the majority, I would imagine the majority of like sex criminals were victims of some kind of sex crime or inappropriate behaviour themselves, and therefore carry trauma. And it's very important to know that on a collective level, and it's very important to know like what we're dealing with, because it's such an important thing to deal with. At the same time, we don't, at that level, really entertain those arguments as an excuse. If no one would really, some people would, to be fair, but most people wouldn't make that argument for that character. And yes, their wrongdoings are very different in scale. One person is preying on vulnerable people and doing something that is so heinous it's just beyond disgusting. The other person is doing things that in fairness, if you were a family member or a housemate or a parent or a girlfriend of this person experiencing this, would really hurt you and would potentially, could have gotten much worse. People in his life, his loved ones, could have died as a result of his behaviour, which is, it's really not a joke, you know, to like put people in that level of danger. And it's a thing that you have to consider in life when you do things. A lot of people have to consider that when they make certain choices. A lot of public figures who want to become outspoken about certain topics, a lot of people who want to engage in certain conflicts or face certain adversaries or situations, they have to think like they have a difficult moral sort of weighing up to do, where they think, I'm endangering a lot of people's lives who don't want anything to do with this. I'm endangering my family's lives because of something I believe in or something I'm doing. And that's a serious responsibility that a lot of people carry. It's a thing I've had to question at times in my life. And it can be very difficult. There's a very difficult moral struggle there that people go through, because you do have a level of duty to protect people around you. And so it can't be too easily swept under the rug that this person has put quite a lot of people in fairly serious danger through his actions. And so, no, it's not in the same scale at all. It's not on the same scale at all as what happened to him. But in a way, I mean, the scale is proportionate, right? So the extent and the seriousness of the crime should be weighed against the extent to which we advocate personal responsibility, but we're not scaling them proportionately. We're going from 100% to 0% in many cases. So someone passes this threshold where their crime is serious enough that we don't do this, and we go, you are 100% responsible, and you did that and it's terrible, or they go below that threshold where they haven't done anything that's really serious enough for us to all collectively agree that that's completely abhorrent and disgusting. Therefore, as long as we can find an adequate explanation vis-a-vis trauma, they are 0% responsible for their actions. That's kind of the message I think some people are promoting and kind of taking from the show. And it's a thing I've seen developing in society in general. And I'm possibly exemplifying it in a kind of extreme way, but I have seen that, broadly speaking, that's kind of the idea. You see it with a lot of people, and I know it's a stupid example to give, and Godwin's law and everything, but Hitler, for example, deeply traumatized individual in many respects. In many, many, many respects. I mean, you read about Hitler's life, so many people's lives back then, by the way. It was a horrible time to be alive for many people. And his life was riddled with trauma, both in his childhood, which sounded terrible, and in his adulthood. He was in the trenches, you know? So the trauma never stopped for him, really. It basically never stopped. And of course he committed evil on a scale that's, how can you even put that into perspective in terms of one human's responsibility? How it's a level of evil and a level of mass wrongdoing that, how can you even concentrate that into the mind and responsibility of one person? It's like, it's unbelievable. It's crazy. And I don't think we should. Again, I think it's useful for us to understand his behavior. It's useful for us to understand when you look at cases like, what's his name? Jeffrey Dahmer, and people like that. And you look at, I think for his parents, it was eye-opening to them, because as far as I remember, I might have the case completely wrong, I don't think they abused him or anything. I think there were some developmental issues with him that were ignored, and I think he was neglected somewhat and had a strange upbringing. And we know, like, small things can affect a child's development really, really badly. And for them, it was, from what I remember from reading about the case, like useful for them to know. Well, not really useful because they weren't going to have any other kids, but it was new information to them, and it's useful for people to know in general. I think that, you know, you might think it's just one kid, and you might think that you can't do this, or you don't have the opportunity to raise this kid right, or whatever. But actually, you might be making someone who's seriously fucked up, not only in a way that's detrimental to themselves, but it's terrible for people around them and for society as a whole. So it's really important and really useful to understand people and to understand why they do the things that they do, and to have sympathy and empathy. Does that mean we're not responsible for our actions just because there may be some understandable reason? I don't believe so. And I think that by telling people that, to be honest, I try to avoid getting into political stuff on this channel. And this topic borders that. There are similar issues in the kind of socio-political sphere around race and some of the messaging around that, and other sort of demographical identities, if that's the phrase, that there's similar messaging. There's similar messaging given to people. You are this, or you have experienced this, or this has happened to you, therefore that's why you did what you did, and this is what you are. And it doesn't matter that you have free will. Forget about your free will. Forget about the fact that you did have a choice. Your choice and your ability to make that choice may have been severely impeded by something that happened to you, but just like you still had a choice, but just forget about that. Like, just, you know, you didn't really. You are this. And to me, I can't imagine wanting to be seen in that way. Sure, it's good if it means you get away with something. It's good in the short term, and you think, oh, great, everybody understands what I did, and nobody judges me, and nobody blames me. And I feel then you'd start to think, that's not really good enough, is it? You know, like, that's not really, I'm not going to gain anything from that. It's not really going to push me to become a better person necessarily. It might give me some tools I need to become more complete as a person, to be happier as a person, and to heal, which will probably make me a better person. But I want to be held more or less to the same standards as everyone else, you know? I've tried at times in my life to not be. I've tried at times to say, you know, I did this because of this, I did that because of that, and it doesn't feel good, man, and it robs you of something. It really does. And I think one of the reasons people have an inclination to do that is because, as I said, we go from one extreme to the other. So we go from the extreme of zero understanding for people whatsoever, chuck them in jail because they did something bad, don't even consider why they might have done it, just fuck off, you did something wrong, that's it, bye. To all the way to the other side, to kind of forget about the people you've wronged, forget about the fact that you should have made better choices, forget about the fact that you probably deep down, whether you realise it or not now, want to make better choices and would be happier if you made better choices. Forget about all of that. You didn't really do anything wrong because you weren't in control because of X, Y, or Z. I think there's a very healthy middle ground to be had. And I worry that we often fail to find those middle grounds on topics such as this. Like, I feel that things that are extreme are more attention grabbing. They are more active. They're less passive. They're more, any idea that's extreme tends to be kind of more aggressive, basically, and therefore more prominent. And we tend to hear it more, and people gravitate towards it because it might feel like more of a powerful idea, and that might make them feel more powerful. And I'm kind of sad to see it because, as I say, I see in a lot of these discussions a kind of mob mentality and a kind of it's like a kind of it's like a club. And it's more than that, it's also, as I say, just something that I think robs people of a very important thing. I don't think it has to be a bad thing or a seriously painful or upsetting thing to have accountability for your actions. And I think when you take the first step in saying, look, what I did was wrong. I didn't care enough about how it affected my family and that jeopardized their safety, and that was wrong. Full stop. I think then it's on other people to say, all right, we appreciate your apology, and we understand that you've been through a lot, and that probably goes some way towards explaining why you did what you did or why you didn't do what you should have done. And, whilst we're not thrilled about what you did, we definitely understand it to a decent degree and understand that it hasn't been easy or whatever. That's a very healthy process, and it allows people to exist in the same moral framework as everybody else, maybe with some level of, I don't want to say handicap, but with some level of a buffer, but you're still existing in the same world as everybody else. You're still a person. You're still essentially treated the same as everybody else. You're not told, no, you don't even exist in this way. You're not even in this race. I know it's not a race, it's just an example, but yeah, so that's how I feel, and I feel it happens with mental illness a lot, and I feel part of this idea comes down from modern psychology, psychotherapy, which to me, to be honest, is a very sick industry. A very, very, very sick and often pseudoscientific industry or field or whatever it is, and whatever it's called. My personal experiences with it have been that it's very dogmatic, it's very closed-minded, it's very formalized and machinistic, it's very rigid in the wrong places and flexible in the wrong places. It's like really, there are many, many, many good people working in that field, and there's a lot of good work being done. There's a lot of great research. There's a lot of really useful discoveries. So many people are helped. I'm not denying that, but I think of all the areas of like medical science, I think it's the one that it has by a mile the most deficiencies and the most issues, and many of those issues are coming to light recently. There's lots of things in the news and stuff. And there's clearly a lot of co-opting by pharmaceutical companies going on and stuff like that. But also just in the literature itself, in the ideology, in the mindset, I found so much of it to be so overly literal in a way that's just dehumanizing. Like, someone will go, yeah, I do this. There's these phrases for certain behaviors for people with certain conditions, who are diagnosed with certain conditions. And by the way, often a diagnosis is like the most subjective thing in the world. It's someone going, you meet this criteria, therefore you fit this category that we've designed to apply to people who broadly fit into this category. I won't get into all of this, but I have another video on it that I'll link. But I personally feel it's a very strange way of categorizing people if you take it too literally. If you treat it as what it is, which is very loose and subjective and useful in some ways and not in others, then cool. But it's not. It's taken as being as literal as cancer. It's like saying, my blood cell count is high because I have cancer. Yeah, it is, literally. And then there's people who say, I have BPD, so that's why I'm doing this right now. That's why I'm engaging in this behavior right now, because I have BPD. So you have no freedom of choice then. Then what are you? You are completely deterministic. There's nothing about you. When you do something good, we can't say you did something good because you had no choice in the matter. You are nothing but your illness, which is vaguely and subjectively defined by a doctor. You apparently are nothing else other than that. because that is the implication of that. Whether anybody likes it or not, that is the implication of that statement. The implication is that is the totality of your being. It cannot be the totality of your being in bad moments and completely non-existent in good moments. It just doesn't work like that. And it implies that you did not have free will in that moment. And it's just not true. It's just not true. I understand that 999 times out of 1,000, a person with condition X is going to choose action X or whatever. I understand that. Like, I'm not unrealistic about it. I'm not going to look at someone who's diagnosed as having a mental disorder and say, like, why the fuck did you do that? You know, what's wrong with you? And react in the same way I would if someone didn't have pre-existing issues. Of course not. And even if they barely have a choice, even if it's so infinitesimally small that it's not really a choice, I still think to some degree we have to behave as though we have a choice, because then if we don't, we kind of lose everything, and we're broken down into these groups of people that tick different boxes and fit different categories. It's extremely dehumanizing, and it robs us of something that is very important. And there are some examples where this doesn't apply. It's not straightforward. I understand some people who, for example, have like serious developmental issues and can't think clearly about certain topics. It would be moronic to try and sort of hold them to this standard. But even in like special facilities and special schools for people who have serious developmental issues, there's still an incentive based around, like, there's still a feeling of, oh, you did good here, and you know that wasn't so good. You know, you can do better than that, and you should have done that differently, or that wasn't very nice what you did to this other service user or person who's at this special school or whatever. You know, you should say sorry for what you did or whatever. You see this all the time with people who, generally speaking, do a very good job of caring for people who have like fairly severe developmental, like intellectual issues. I don't know what the way to say it is nowadays, but you know what I'm talking about. And I feel generally the standard of care there is quite a lot better than it is for people who have these oddly vague kind of transient mental health disorders, where doctors kind of pick and choose, particularly therapists who often seem to have a vested interest in maintaining some kind of relationship between them and the patient. They can kind of pick and choose when to say, well, that's not your fault. How could you do anything different? You're mentally ill. Look at what you went through, you know? That's why you did what you did. You did that because of what you went through. There's no shades of complexity to it whatsoever apart from that. So yeah, I think that's wrong. I don't think it's a good thing to take away from the show. I think there's a healthy middle ground to be had. I think the show is extremely useful at presenting many different things. And overall, like, as I said, amazing. It's not even what I'm describing. I don't think is even a shortcoming of the show. I don't think that. I think it's a thing that's an idea that's kind of been brewing, and an idea that, for obvious reasons, is quite appealing to people. And to be honest, I've seen people use this horribly. I've seen what this does in real life. The example in the show doesn't scream that at you, but I've seen it with people. I've seen people say to their parents, why did you do this thing to me? These horrible things, you know? And their parents say, you don't know what I went through when I was a kid, and you should see my childhood. And it's like, that's where that idea can take you. And I know that not everybody is espousing that particular model of the idea or using it in that way against people. And you could take that idea and still have a more reciprocal, communal interpretation of it. But at the same time, ultimately, that lack of accountability is what it leads to, or what it can lead to. And I've seen it, and it's very dark. It's very horrible to see a person basically say, no, like, this doesn't stop with me. I'm going to carry on, and I don't have to feel bad about what I did because I've been victimized. And that would be a very bad thing to take away from the show. And I know that a lot of people, and you see it online, you see it in the way people might speak to you about topics like this, they use it as a way of being beyond reproach, basically. And that's very sad. And people who have the power to cause great pain to other people, they shouldn't be beyond reproach. They should be understood, but they shouldn't be beyond reproach. That's how I feel. Going back to the show, anyway, overall, just in general, my feelings on it. Really amazing. I felt a bit afterwards, having read about the show, I felt my only other slight issue with it was I'm not sure how faithfully true to reality it was. And I understand there are certain things that just make sense to change. For example, the final scene of the show was very, very moving, and he's got his headphones in, he's listening to this voicemail, and he finds out where this nickname came from, and he is also in that moment. Someone gives him a free drink, and you see that there's some part of her and her behaviour is in him, and that a lot of it comes from being wounded, and that they both have a shared woundedness, and that it comes out in all sorts of weird ways. And it's more complicated than that. It's more layered than that, and in a way that I can't describe, and it has to be seen. It's an extremely moving ending. It's extremely well done. It makes me emotional thinking about it now. It's so good. And I would imagine he wasn't listening to that exact audio at that exact moment, if that moment even happened in the bar. It doesn't matter, because what it's telling you is true. What it's telling you about him and Martha is true. There are other parts I'm not sure, like, I don't know though, because at first people found who they were convinced was the real Martha, and I understand it's a bit tasteless, to be honest, for people to try and find out who Martha is, but naturally it really piques your curiosity when you see that there's news articles about this person. So everybody's been trying to find who the real Martha is with limited success, and there was a time when we all thought we had definitely found the real Martha, and I don't think it was her. But seeing that, it seemed that she didn't really look the way that Martha does in the show, and it made some of the salacious aspects of the show less shocking, and appeared like they might have been there to just add meaningless shock value, to go like, whoa, he wanted to have sex with her, that's crazy, because that happens in the show. You think, and not to be disrespectful, but you think, oh my god, that's pretty crazy that he's like wanking to the thought of her and thinking about her during sex. Like, it's shocking. It's shocking, basically. If she was like really stunning, it wouldn't be shocking that someone would do that, and I know that idea is like offensive to a lot of people, but that's just life, it's just a fact. And so yeah, it initially seemed that way, like maybe this was added in to make it just more shocking, more clickbaity, more whatever. But I don't think it was, to be fair, because actually it seems like that's not the real Martha. We don't know who the real Martha is, so we don't know. So I understand that certain elements, there's other parts that are not worth getting into, but there are other details that are quite different. For example, the viral outburst, that didn't happen. I understand how that's kind of an encapsulation of what did happen. Not really. That's getting into where like you're changing quite a big bit of the story. And there are various other details that sound a bit different from how they happen in reality. And there's a thin line, I think, between making it narratively functional and still sort of supplying the essential truths of the story, to like kind of changing it to turn it into a show. And I think it's a bit more than a show, and I think the fact that it's a true story makes it more than a show, because it's narrated and it's essentially a true story, and you're hearing about someone's experiences. So to think that it was too heavily altered, for me, would be disappointing personally. I don't really think it was. I kind of trust now that it wasn't really, but that was initially my slight problem with it. But I think that will come out over time. I think people will learn more and more about the reality behind the show. And I know there's a large school of thought that would say that doesn't matter. I disagree. To me, in this situation, it does. For me, the true stories behind things have always mattered. Certain music, knowing the stories of the people who made the music, for example, knowing about Brian Wilson's life, it makes the Beach Boys music a lot more interesting. It makes the fact that he made such happy music, it makes that very interesting, knowing what a sad and strange and difficult life he lived, and what he went through. And there are so many examples of that, when knowing the truth behind something makes it more powerful. And if not, why say it's a true story, you know? But yeah, I think it is. I think it is essentially a true story. And regardless of that, even if some liberties were taken that I personally would not be thrilled about, I think it put a level of emotional nuance and complexity on screen that I don't remember seeing elsewhere. At least I've seen stuff like that in things like The Sopranos, but like not... It was unusual to see a person portray himself in that way. It was unusual to see a person portray himself. You know, when he does things like in the final episode, he does something and you're like, oh, Jesus, don't do that, you know? And it's unusual for someone to portray themselves so openly in that way and to not try to seem like anything, just to just say what happened and to show themselves in that light. It was very... very powerful. It made me think a lot, and it just I think that's what art should be doing and should do more. And it made me realize, God, like there's just not enough stuff like that. There's not enough people doing that, and it's such a powerful thing when you do that, when you are that vulnerable in your work. So it's an incredible thing to put out there, and as I say, very layered and nuanced. So I hope that doesn't get boiled down to trauma makes people do bad things or questionable things, and that's that. You know, I think that's missing the point, and I don't think it'd be a good way to internalize the show. Anyway, yeah, great show. Love to know what you guys thought of it and of this topic in general. Hope you enjoy this video. Thanks for watching.